Hello everyone and welcome to the first lecture, well not first lecture, but first e-lecture for the subject. Today we will be looking at the biological factors that contribute towards crime, which is one which is the first of a series of lectures that are going to look at the theories of crime that explain the roots of crime. As I mentioned earlier, over the next few weeks, we will be looking at different factors that contribute towards the development of criminal or deviant behavior, starting with the biological factors. Once we have finished that, we will move on to social and psychological factors, and finally, developmental or learning theories of crime. Once we have looked at the different perspectives, we look to see how these different theories can actually be integrated to give us a more holistic understanding of crime. And what I hope you will get out of this is an understanding that criminal or deviant behavior isn't caused by just one or two factors, but usually is an influence of a combination of factors. If you look at this slide, you will see that we can understand criminal or deviant behaviors from different levels or perspectives. At the lowest level, we focus at the individual, where we usually examine cognitive or biological factors. Psychological factors could come into play as well. This is what we will be focusing on in this lecture today. At the next level, we try and understand it from a perspective of how a group or peer or family influence can actually influence the development of certain behaviors in an individual. Not surprisingly, if we want to understand the development of behaviors, we must also look at the development of certain beliefs and values, the ideas of what is right and wrong, because this in turn will influence whether somebody decides to get involved in deviant behavior or not. At the next level, we look at it from a community perspective. Factors that could come into play here are things like religiosity, social norms, what is expected, what is not expected, how people around them react to certain things. And finally, at the highest level, we look at things from a more societal perspective, which is much broader, where we will examine things like political factors, the history or past events within a society that could contribute towards certain behaviors. In this subject, we will be focusing mainly on the first two levels, which are the individual and group influence levels. Proponents of the biological perspective start with one very basic premise. They say that the criminal is radically different from the non criminal, in the sense that you can tell that this person is a criminal because of either physical characteristics, behaviors, the way the person speaks, and it is very distinct from somebody who's not a criminal. One of the earliest people to propose something like this is this guy called Lombroso, and we will look at what he has to say later. Biological theorists also may suggest that some people are born criminals, which then suggests that they can't help the fact that they're criminals. They were born or made that way. So they have no control over their behaviors and they're just following what is, for lack of a better word, already predestined for them. And they take this view because biological theories tend to see crime as a form of illness. It's a disease caused by pathological factors which are specific to certain groups of individuals. These factors could be a result of genetic influences, for example, and are beyond their control. They have no choice. They have no control over whether they receive or inherit certain genes and therefore the behaviors that follow. The question then is, if we are saying that their behaviors are a result of a disease or an illness, can we blame them for their deviant behaviors? And if we cannot blame them for their deviant behaviors, can we punish them for their deviant behaviors? If you think back to our first lecture, you'll remember that one of the key definitions of whether something is a crime or not is that the person must have committed the crime voluntarily. It must be within their control. Now, if their deviant behavior is a result of an illness, it's not really within their control. And if it's not really within their control, how can we then punish them for it from a moral perspective? Which is why this issue is so widely debated in the criminal justice system because lawyers, criminologists, policymakers, even the general public don't want to set a loophole or create a loophole where criminals who have control over what they're doing actually use this as a means of escape. But at the same time, we don't want to unnecessarily punish people who have no control over their behaviors either. Criminal anthropology is a field from the biological perspective, understanding based on perceived links between the nature of a crime and the personality or the physical appearance of the suspected offender. It is basically the first type of criminal profiling that was available in our society, and some elements of it is still used by law enforcement agencies. Lombroso, an Italian criminologist, was one of the leading founding fathers in this area, and his first premise is that crime is not an inherent part of human nature, in the sense that the tendency to be involved in criminal or deviant behavior was not inherent in everyone. But it was biological in nature in the sense that there were some people who were more inclined to commit crimes. And he considered the criminal then to be a species that was between the modern human of that time and the more primitive humans. And he argues criminality was inherited by these people due to certain issues in their genetic structure. Supposes that criminals he has suggested that they have a twisted nose, they are likely to have extra high cheekbones, longer arms, larger jaws, and excessive wrinkles in their face. In the 19th century, him and his followers performed autopsies on criminals, and it is based on these autopsies that they declared that they have these similar characteristics. As mentioned earlier, most of these similarities involved higher foreheads. They're also likely to be taller. They had a different size head in the sense their heads were larger, and he declared that female offenders too had similar characteristics that distinguished them from the rest of the female population. And he said it was even easier to identify them because they had really strong masculine features. Although a lot of his research has been discredited by modern science, um, we cannot deny that he did give us the foundation for offender profiling. In Italy, there is a museum that's been set up to showcase his work. And if you want to find out more about that museum, you can actually click on the link on this slide. Another perspective that can be used in understanding criminal behavior is that of eugenic criminology. Let me give you some background first. Eugenic criminology and it declined in popularity as soon after that. What it proposes causes of crime is passed down across generations through bad genes. And these bad genes are then inherited by members of specific families. And what happens then is that these families then have a disproportionate amount of defective delinquents. That was his term, not mine, which then resulted in them being known as bad gene families. Although this area of research declined in popularity soon after the 19th century, it has recently re-emerged as an area of interest, specifically in genetics and biological criminology, as our research techniques and science has progressed to allow us to understand more of this area. One thing that I would like to bring to your notice here is that if we're going to go down this route of eugenic criminology and propose that criminal genes are inherited, we need to think about two things. One then would be the ethicality of actually sentencing and punishing criminals, if we're going to say that they inherited a criminal gene. And secondly, are we going then to discriminate against certain families or certain individuals that are known to have a criminal gene from the time they're young, even before they display these behaviors? Now that we have looked at it from the broader perspective, let's look at specific biological risk factors. Earlier, what we spoke about was behavioral genetics. as well as molecular genetics, where we spoke about the role that genes play in formation and development of human or even animal behavior. Molecular genetics, on the other hand, looks at the structure and function of genes at the molecular levels and proposes that specific genes are the foundation for specific. We find out more about these two areas through things like twin and adoption studies. Through twin studies, we develop an understanding of the influence of nature and nurture because we can understand, or at least try and understand, which has a stronger influence on twins by studying those who are raised together or raised apart. To some extent, we can also understand this by studying adopted children, by looking to answer the question of whether they are more similar to biological or adopted parents. The points on this next slide may already be familiar to you, but I'm going to quickly go through them anyway. And if you already know it, you're welcome to fast forward. When we look at twin studies, there's certain key terms that we need to understand. Firstly, monozygotic twins refers to identical twins, that is, twins that share the exact same genetic structure because they were a result of the same egg and sperm, which was then split in two. We've also got dizygotic twins, who are non-identical twins who may share some similarities, but they do not share the exact same genetic structure as their result of conception of two separate sperms and two separate eggs. The third term that researchers in this area often use is concordance, which is a word that they use to understand the degree to which sorry, let me repeat that, is the word they use to understand the degree to which related pairs of subjects, in this case twins, show particular behaviors or conditions that they're interested in studying. What we have found from twin research is that identical twins definitely have a higher concordance rate for criminal behaviors. And what this then suggests is that there is a strong genetic component in understanding the roots of criminal behaviors. The other factors that actually help us understand the influence of nature versus nurture on criminal behavior is whether the twins were brought up in a shared environment or a non-shared environment. Usually, twins who are brought up together have a shared environment where they have similar prenatal experiences because they were conceived and carried in the womb at the same time. They share the same home environment in the sense they're exposed to the same things at home and in their immediate surroundings, the same sorts of people, the same sorts of behaviors. One question that's asked then is that if you have antisocial parents, would they pass these antisocial tendencies through the shared environment to their children? On the other hand, we also have non-shared environments, which are usually what we study when we are looking at twins who are reared apart. So these are twins who may have been brought up in different homes, different schools, and been involved in different activities throughout their. In the next few slides, we're going to examine some of the more famous twin and adoption studies that have shed some light into our understanding of the development of deviant or criminal behaviors. One of the most famous twin studies is actually what is known as the Twins Early Development Study, or TEDS. It was conducted by researchers at the University of London King's College. The data was initially collected in the mid-1990s, but was later analyzed by different researchers in 2005. It had a very big sample size where they studied over 13,000 pairs of twins. And their main area of interest at that time was actually to better understand language and cognitive development, academic achievement, and behavioral problems. But as part of their data analysis, they also realized a few things that are interesting to us in relation to the development of deviant behaviors. For example, they found that heritability or genetics plays a modest role in determining antisocial behavior, which suggests that there is no real strong genetic component in these behaviors, with the development of callous or unemotional traits being the exception. In what this means is that although there is not a high genetic influence on the development of other antisocial behaviors, there is definitely a high genetic influence on the development of callous or unemotional traits. Callous and unemotional traits are usually linked to people who are indifferent towards the suffering of others and who have very low levels of empathy, which has also then been shown to have a high correlation with certain types of deviant behaviors. They also found that the social environment that the twins grow up in do affect the individuals who are already at genetic risk for antisocial behaviors. So, for example, a pair of twins who have parents who display antisocial behaviors are more likely to grow up and display such behaviors themselves if they were abused in any way as children, as compared to twins who have a similar genetic structure but were brought up in more loving or warm environments. The third interesting finding that came out from their data analysis is that familial and parental influence decreases with age, which is not surprising as peer influences grow stronger, as do the influence of the media and other factors. But genetic influence increases with age. So, although the influence of the immediate family environment may decrease as the twins grow older, the influence of the genes actually increases as they grow older. Another famous study involving twins that have shed some light to this area is the twin study of child and adolescent development. In this study, they actually collected data from a Swedish twin registry. Their sample size wasn't as large, they had about 1,200 pairs of twins from Sweden. And what is interesting about this study is that they actually followed up with the twins for a period of 8 years. And what they found is that there is some difference in boys and girls, where um, for boys, genetic factors played an important role in the early onset of aggressive behaviors. That means the display of aggression at younger ages, particularly those who are below 5 years old. But this genetic component became less important in the development of later delinquent behaviors. For girls, on the other hand, genetic factors played a big role in prediction of aggressive and delinquent behaviors across ages. So whether they were young or old, those who had a genetic propensity to aggression and delinquency were more likely to display those behaviors than those who did not have a genetic component to this behavior. As mentioned earlier, adoption studies are critical in helping us understand the relationship that exists between adopted children and their biological and adoptive parents. It also helps us to understand the differences between the influences with nature and nurture. Unfortunately, there are not many adoption studies available, and even those that are available, even amongst those that are available, many have methodological issues. But for the purposes of today's lecture, we'll focus on two studies, both of which were conducted in the 1970s. The aim of both studies was similar in the sense that they wanted to identify environments that were most conducive to the development of criminal behaviors. The first study was conducted by Crow, and what he found is that antisocial behaviors were linked to two specific factors. Firstly, the child's age at time of adoption, in the sense that the older the child was when they were adopted, the more likely they were to display antisocial behaviors, and the longer the child spent in temporary or foster care, the more likely they were to develop antisocial behaviors. This is probably a reflection of the foster care system at that time, the amount of attention that the caregivers were able to give the children, as well as the peer influences at that time. A second study conducted by Metnick and his colleagues found a significant relationship between the conviction history of the adoptee and the biological parents. And he found this to be especially true for male or chronic offenders. What this suggests is that there is a strong genetic link. And he says that adopted children who have parents who are more likely, who were criminals, were more likely to be criminals themselves, especially if they were male or chronic offenders, even though they were not brought up by the parent with the criminal tendencies. He also specified that although there was a link between the parents in terms of criminal involvement, there was no specific link between the type of crime committed by the parent and the child. meaning the child is not likely to commit the same type of crime that the parent was committing or convicted for. Biological factors can also come into play even before someone is born or at birth. In terms of in utero exposure, we know things like exposure to drugs and nicotine can affect the fetus and the because these three things together affect. Specifically, we know that if a mother smokes during pregnancy, the impact on boys is stronger as compared to girls, as in women who smoke are more likely to have sons who are involved in deviant behaviors than daughters. Research has also shown women who quit smoking while pregnant um, are less likely to have children with antisocial behaviors compared to those who continue to smoke during pregnancy. However, we cannot put this down just to the effect of nicotine in itself, but it could also be because mothers who smoke during pregnancy have lower socioeconomic status and may already have more antisocial tendencies themselves. In terms of drug use, we know that mothers who take drugs while they're pregnant are more likely to have kids who abuse drugs themselves, probably because they have already been addicted to drugs at the in utero stage. Research has also shown that those babies who are born with fetal alcohol syndrome as a result of excessive alcohol consumption are more likely to be involved in deviant behaviors. In the area of birth complications, we know that birth complications can result in neurological deficits, which then in turn could lead to lower IQ and poorer school performance. The link between lower IQ and poorer school performance is something that we will explore in more detail as we look at the developmental risk factors that may contribute towards the development of deviant behavior. Other biological factors that may contribute to increased criminal behavior is gender, age, body type, and personality. In terms of gender, we know that males are more likely to be involved in crime. In terms of age, we know that the tendency to break the law decreases across life. In terms of body type, we know that there is a disproportionate number of criminals who are more muscular. And finally, violent criminals are also more likely to be aggressive, impulsive, and cruel in terms of their personality. The last two slides actually give you resources for further reading, some of which are from the news or popular media, and some are journal articles, which are more academic in nature. You don't have to go through them, but of course, I encourage you to go through them because it will give you more to talk about during tutorials, and it will also definitely help you with your individual assignment one. And that brings us to the end of the lecture. I won't see you next week, but I hope you will all attend your tutorial classes. And if you have any questions, email me or give me a call.